Disclaimer. This video is a look into a fantasy character whose actions rival some of the worst real-life dictators. His story involves war, murder, racism, and many disturbing medical practices. All of the events described in this video are entirely fictional. However, if you find any of these topics sensitive or triggering, feel more than free to click off. Thank you. Phyrexia is hell. 9 spheres of morbidly efficient suffering, overseen and ruled by their god, the ineffable. It is a plane where flesh meets metal, creating merciless, murderous creatures, artificially enhanced to make them perfect for their tasks. Mad priests, horrors, demons, all of them a part of a horrifically misshapen world. Phyrexians are on an endless conquest, want to spread their perfection throughout the multiverse, the perfection of glistening oil which fuels their flesh and metal bodies. For 9 millennia they have ravaged and terrorized many a world, scavenging them for resources, looking for a way to return back home, to the home that the ineffable has once emerged from. Ever since I read it a few months back, I have been fascinated with the Magic the Gathering novel, The Thran, by Robert J. King. A book I would recommend even if you aren't a Magic player like myself. It depicts the story of one of Magic's oldest, and perhaps its most notorious villain, Yawgmoth, a handsome experimental healer and talented scientist. I'm putting a lot of quotation marks on those labels as pretty much every single one of them is a very warped description of what Yawgmoth truly was. On the world of Dominaria, the Thran were a highly skilled society of artificers Yawgmoth originated from. However, Yawgmoth was a part of a faction of eugenicists, and was exiled for his unethical healing practices. But when the Thran's greatest inventor, Glacian, was fatally injured and their healing methods didn't work, his wife Rebecca invited Yawgmoth back into the kingdom, into its capital Halcyon, to heal her husband. Glacian objected against Yawgmoth's return, as he was originally on the very council that had exiled him, but his wishes were not heard out. Using his cunning, a bit of genuine talent, and a ton of disingenuous practices, Yawgmoth took over the Thran Empire as a fantasy dictator, one seemingly directly inspired by Joseph Stalin, destroying Dominaria as he knew it, and creating Phyrexia. The premise of the Thran is relatively simple, but over the past few months I've had a morbid fascination with how exactly Yawgmoth took over this society, going from an outlaw to a deity in the matter of less than a decade through lies, deception, and being absolutely ruthless at every opportunity he was given. Today, I would like to share this fascination with you, exploring the horrors of Yawgmoth specifically in the Thran novel, before he became the ineffable, the one whose name shall not be spoken. It seems easy to commit inhuman atrocities once you're no longer human yourself, especially once you are the god of eugenics. But Yawgmoth already had an arsenal of terrible, terrible crimes behind him long before then. These are what I would like to focus on. And I will be talking about them not in a chronological order, but instead from what I consider to be his lesser offenses, to the worst crimes against humanity and many other races that he has committed. This video will also not be a complete catalog of Yawgmoth's crimes. If you want every disturbing detail, you can read the novel. There will be links in the description for where you can purchase it as a digital copy, as an original at this point may be quite hard to find. Today, I will only be focusing on Yawgmoth's worst crimes, his most heinous, character-defining actions that went on to change the face of Dominaria and the multiverse at large, forever. At 35 years old, Yawgmoth was called back from exile, as a once despised eugenicist, and now seemingly the only hope for Rebecca's dying husband, the genius inventor of Halcyon. Shortly after entering Halcyon, and before getting much in the way of political power, we already see Yawgmoth being a cold-blooded murderer. When he first comes down to the disease-ridden caves of the damned under Halcyon, a kind of cave prison colony, if you will, to find test subjects, he immediately establishes who was in control by killing a man who was no match for his swordsmanship, showing off his arsenal of toxic weapons and not hesitating to use them. Yawgmoth calmly walked to the fallen man and stepped onto his back. He turned slowly about. His eyes pinned the others, one by one, to the wall.
I have more poison darts here, enough for 5 of you. There are also daggers and swords and other devices. Everyone will get his turn. Or, perhaps, you can believe me and conduct me inward.
Contrary to his healer status, which he keeps throughout the entire book, Yawgmoth will continue to showcase very little regard for human lives. A soldier operating a cannon attempted to shoot a ship battling Yawgmoth's own Yatagan, but Yawgmoth performed an unexpected maneuver, ramming his ship into the enemy one. This resulted in his own ship being shot. Yawgmoth survived. Of course, he didn't thank the soldier for attempting to help him, but he didn't even demote her, didn't even execute her. He walked up right to her, ripping her eyes out with his very own hands before throwing her off the Halcyon walls. Also notable about the mission of Yawgmoth's Yatagan, it was a mission in which he went into the atmosphere far beyond of what a regular human should be able to withstand to stay in secret. This led to many fatalities on board of the ship simply to have the mission be successful. Taking over the Null Sphere, a highly desired control station for Yawgmoth, he also killed the artificers overseeing it one by one until they agreed to help him. For a regular person, this may have been enough to label him a monster, but for Yawgmoth, this is merely a showcase, an example of how he makes his role happen, how he earns the respect of those he views are beneath him. Which, for Yawgmoth, is everyone. All who served Yawgmoth were ruled by fear, even his most loyal, most special servant. Power stones were the batteries of Halcyon, stones which could power households, flying stone chairs, and push forward Glacian's endless technical innovations. They were, in many ways, holding the Thran society together. Gix was the man who stabbed Glacian with one of them, the disease-ridden outcast who infected the genius of Halcyon with the same disease. Gix was an enemy, but also one of Yawgmoth's most valuable allies in one. He was the first person Yawgmoth directly sought out on his very first visit to the Caves of the Damned. He took him up as a test subject to try out Physis cures on. Gix hated Yawgmoth just as much as he hated Glacian, but Yawgmoth knew how to take advantage of that hatred. He claimed that Physis, the disease Gix and Glacian were both suffering from, was caused by Power Stone radiation, similarly to how cancer can be caused by regular radiation in our world. This infuriated Gix, as he now saw through the shiny, white beauty of Halcyon, saw it causing the darkness and sickness in the disease-ridden prison beneath it. Gix even attempted to murder Glacian when Yawgmoth left his laboratory, only being stopped by the fear of death that Glacian had instigated in him. Hands tied around Glacian's throat, Gix began to speak.
You did this to us. I used to think I had infected you, but you are the one who infected us both. You infected thousands in the caves.
Each time he said the word infected, spittle leapt from his lips.
That's reason enough to kill you.
Glacian had no air to form words, but his lips silently spoke them.
To murder me? It's not murder. It's justice. Kill me and you'll die.
Glacian's response was little more than moving lips and a bit of whispered air. Nostrils flaring in distaste, Gix eased his grip, allowing Glacian to suck a breath into his lungs. Throughout the entire novel, Gix is ruled by honesty, discipline, charisma, and fear. Fear was at the very top of Gix's motivations. Surviving was what he did best, which in the end turned out to be a terrible mistake. Yawgmoth even revealed this to him in one of their confrontations.
Honesty, discipline, charisma, fear. These are your marionette strings. I have been pleased to pull them, but I have no more need of a puppet.
Once he found out that he couldn't kill Glacian, and was also made to believe that Halcyon created the pernicious vices itself, he ran away, through the sewers and back into the caves of the Damned, where he started a revolt. The Damned, as they were called by Halcytes, emerged in hordes from beneath the ascending city, smiting Halcyon off its feet, easily scrapping through the Halcite guard, weakened by its seeming unnecessity over the years. From the sewers, scabrous and violent and hideous monsters had emerged. They arose in a reeking tide up the 8 terraces. They slew any they encountered. Only in that last instant of life could the Halcytes see the eyes of their killers, and know these were not monsters. These were humans. These were Thran. The group neared the eastern approach. Smoke twisted into the air, sooty parodies of Rebecca's heavenly ascent. Rooftops burned, fire spread. The streets were littered with the fallen. Dark figures darted between broken doorways. A tide of them rose even then to the 8th terrace and started spilling down Council Boulevard. They smashed windows and slew citizens and set fires as they went. A group of 10 Halcite guards rushed into the street and formed a line to hold them back. "Look," Rebecca said breathlessly. "Look, the guard is forming." The invaders crashed into that line of white soldiers and rolled over them. The wave continued on, reaching the broad stairs at the side of the council hall. Faces lifted. Human faces ravaged by hunger and bleached by darkness and marked with vices. The Halcite guard was easily overcome. Yawgmoth, not so much. He assembled a guard of his own, arming the medics who were aiding him in his lab, managing to put together a cure just shortly before. Just as it looked that the invaders were about to kill Glacian's wife Rebecca, Yawgmoth stepped in, offering them a cure in only a week's time, using it on Gix to show that it actually worked.
"Wait, look,"
Gix shouted. He gazed at his arm. The black lesions receded. Pink scar tissue filled in the gaps. He looked at his other arm, where the same process took place. The sores shrank on his chest, his legs, his face.
"It wasn't a lie. It is a cure."
This allowed Yawgmoth to take control of the military and strengthen it, seemingly to keep the city safe and act in its best interest, were the Damned to come back. But if we have learned anything about Yawgmoth so far, it's that no interests matter to him beyond his own. In the caves, the promised cure was delivered and distributed amongst the Damned. Many of them were helped. Some of them even got pulled up and out from the caves and into the seemingly angelic world of Halcyon. Many believed Yawgmoth to be the savior of the Damned. But over time, the cure became diluted. Most people stayed firm in their belief in Yawgmoth, but not Gix. Gix began leading people out of the caves, helping over 800 get freed and survive through secret tunnels and passages, an undoubtedly heroic act.
"I'd rather die trying to escape than go back down."
The young speaker pushed past Gix, clambered up the rubble-strewn edge of the culvert, and shoved open the grate. He clambered out from beneath it. Hissing in fierce laughter, he said,
"Come on, the rest of you. Come out. Breathe the air of freedom."
Another followed, then third, fourth, and fifth. Gix held open the grate. There were a mob of black shadows cast against the leaning pickets. They crouched beneath the night sky as though they still lurked in sewers, but there was a manic joy in their hunched shoulders. Their feet were quick on the cobbles. Gix stared out at them.
"Good luck to you."
He lowered the grate over the culvert. All 5 were suddenly dead. It was as quick as that. There were 5 quick flashes of dagger light and the unmistakable smell of blood spraying. The manic shadows fell in wet mounds on alley stones. Gix led another revolt. This one, however, was much less successful. Yawgmoth clearly planned for it. He even kept Gix alive in the sewers exactly for this reason. His military, now with Power Stone-infused armor, took care of the matters easily, murdering hundreds. Yawgmoth personally assisted them by dropping a huge statue of her backs, which killed over a half of the revolting damned. Gix tried to steal one of the military power stone suits and fought back as much as he could, yet in the end he was chased back into the caves, driven out by his fear of death once again. And there, he met with death once again in the form of Yawgmoth. Yawgmoth sighed impatiently.
Whether or not you realize it, Gix, you are my puppet. You have been my puppet for years. I knew you would rise to lead your people. Your idealism runs deep, but not as deep as your fear of death. It makes you utterly predictable. Honesty, discipline, charisma, fear. These are your marionette strings. I have been pleased to pull them, but I have no more need of a puppet. Then why don't you go ahead and kill me?
Gix shouted.
A puppet? No. But a servant? Yes. Like all of us, Gix, you must ascend to survive. You must climb out of your former skin. It is too small for you now. Take command of your strings. Vow your loyalty to me, and live. If I am only a puppet,
Gix growled,
then why don't you just make me vow?
Yawgmoth's eyes were as sharp as his sword.
That is what I am doing.
He stared a moment more and then snorted.
This is tiresome.
Yawgmoth raised his sword for the killing blow.
Wait, I'll swear it. I will serve you, loyally, forever.
No one will ever know if either of them knew it. But in that moment, Yawgmoth found one of his most loyal, perhaps his most loyal servant of all time.
The stone.
Glacian gasped out.
It must have been imperfect.
How could that be? Rebecca wondered, dread veiling in her face. Glacian bleakly gasped.
What perfect stone could have stabbed me?
Yawgmoth was invited back from exile to heal the very man who originally voted to expel him from the Thran society. Glacian. The disease Glacian suffered from was originally unknown, defying the magical healing which Hellsites seemed to rely upon. Yawgmoth coined this disease Physis and went about healing it in a different way. In the introductory parts of the novel, Yawgmoth approached Glacian with ideas that felt relatively scientific. In a sense, Yawgmoth not only earns the trust of the Hellsites, but also of the reader. He talks about the concept of microbiology, for example, little critters that cause disease. He takes samples from Glacian with a scalpel, whilst the latter is fully conscious, but he does seemingly take a scientific approach to developing a cure. However, whilst we do see this in one of the opening scenes, what Yawgmoth goes on to do after is largely left out. Glacian cast a long-suffering look at Rebecca, and he gave a raspy sigh.
You have to understand, you are no savior, Yawgmoth. We are done with real healers. They have exhausted their techniques, and now in desperation we turn to you. We aren't setting aside witchery, we are summoning it.
Glacian fixed the large man with a level stare.
Your so-called methods are only too well known to us. I was among the elders who voted for your original banishment. If it were up to me, I would still be stuck in Farja Morale, poking sticks up the backsides of syphilitic mules. But my wife fears for me, and the council and city are terrified to do without me, as I am the only one who truly understands the machinery beneath the city. They are willing to try anything. And you, Yawgmoth, you just barely qualify as anything.
The men's eyes met. Hatred leapt like sparks between them. Glacian continued.
You got one thing right, though. I am dying of a wasting illness. I am resigned to it. Only in that resignation do I let you poke and scrape. You cannot make me worse than death itself will shortly.
Breaking eye contact, Yawgmoth laughed lightly.
You wouldn't say that if you were a syphilitic mule.
During his period of healing, Glacian attempted to get away from Yawgmoth multiple times. He even sent a letter to the Elders' Council, asking them to cast Yawgmoth out, calling him a charlatan and a tormentor, saying he'd rather die than to spend any more time at mercy to his scalpel. Unfortunately, at this point, Yawgmoth already had political power. He was not the other man who pushed back the damned, but he had already created the narrative that Power Stones were the main cause for Physis. There is no evidence of this Physis affecting anyone except your husband, and the prison hordes in the caves. Indeed, your husband's ailment came from the caves, not from the city. Why not simply double the guard at the caves to prevent any escape and suspend visiting raids until this plague has just run its course? Rebecca was poised to respond, but Yawgmoth spoke instead.
On the contrary, I have seen this plague in 3 other cities en route to here, and have heard of it in other 4.
But always among the rabble, interrupted the eldest of Losanon. Always among the poor, indigent.
No.
Yawgmoth broke in.
There is evidence of infection among the citizenry of Halcyon, among folk who have had no contact with untouchables. I have charted the progress of this plague in the Caves of the Damned and know the beginning signs of it. I have found 6 other cases in the city itself, and I have not conducted an extensive search. In fact, I would speculate that among the nearly 400 of us gathered here, 10 are infected and do not even know it.
As usual, fear was Yawgmoth's tool of choice, even above his scalpels and vials. He managed to keep Glacian on his bed and under his constant supervision. Perhaps on his own Yawgmoth wouldn't have the power to accomplish this whilst gaining more and more political power, but he had one more big political figure at his disposal. Rebecca. Rebecca was the architect who created much of Halcyon's beautiful architecture, and herself preached the idea of ascension. She is depicted as a very ideologically pure character, one which doesn't understand the darker parts of the world at all. Her main focus outside of the main story of the book is in fact finishing a huge Power Stone temple that lights the entire city up, filled with metaphors, helping Halcytes ascend even further. In the capacity and way that Yawgmoth could love, he loved Rebecca. And Rebecca loved him back. Of course, Yawgmoth still manipulated and used her just like everyone else. It was Rebecca who brought him back to heal her husband, and was Rebecca who, even after 9 years of failure, kept the hope that Yawgmoth could cure him. It was Rebecca who gave him the idea of preaching ascension, and who stood up for him whenever she could. Whilst I appreciate the idea of Rebecca as a very pure soul, it is clear that her ideology got completely lost somewhere along the way. When a cure was developed and everyone except for her husband seemed to be responding well, she didn't bat an eye. Yawgmoth of course knew he couldn't have a genius artificer opposing him in his plans, but he also knew how to still take advantage of him. Over time, Glacian became glued to his wheelchair and schizophrenic, feeling as if 2 different people were creating his inventions. This was, once again, Yawgmoth's doing.
His split mind had proved useful. Whenever I need a device, I begin the design myself and leave it in his room. He cannot remember having started the work, but he will finish it, design it for me. Together, we have created some marvelous devices for the defense of the Empire.
This is a difficult love triangle, but I feel at a point where my mentally ill loved one is being used for military purposes, I would figure something isn't right here. In fact, it is really, really wrong. But Rebecca allowed Yawgmoth to continue doing as he wished with poor Glacian, whilst her and Yawgmoth did as they saw fit with each other. "Do you see?" Rebecca asked. "Do you see what I have seen?" His lips were a grim line on his face.
You've seen a lot of sculpture.
No, I've seen through a lot of sculpture. I've seen the future. The future is you. He blinked. He took a deep breath.
I'm not sure what to say to that.
Rebecca saved him the trouble, leaning across the helm of that great cutter and kissing him full on the lips. She cradled the back of his head in her hand, felt the warmth of his lips, breathed in the scent of him. Yawgmoth pushed her gently back.
What are you doing?
Her eyes searched his. What do you mean? What am I doing? He seemed almost to blush. The great granite Yawgmoth blushed.
It's just now with these icy peaks. They can come so suddenly. I don't want to risk a crash.
He paused, seeming to sense how awkward he was being, and laughed lightly.
I don't want to risk my future.
Rebecca sat back in the seat. She felt as though he had sliced her open and dragged all her insides out on the floor.
It will be good to see the city again.
Yawgmoth said.
I have some new ideas for treating your husband.
Glacian even fell into a 2-month-long coma after finding out what Yawgmoth was doing with his designs, which was most likely induced by Yawgmoth himself. How else could have Glacian stayed in a coma exactly until the time when Yawgmoth and Rebecca had to go for a flight to check on the other city-states? In that time, he created a machine which, operated by his goblin servants, breathed for him, fed him, and allowed him to go on living, ravaged as he was by not only physis, but seemingly many other diseases too.
I'm going to fight him, Rebecca. I'm going to fight him for you. I'm going to fight Yawgmoth, and I'm going to fight death. And they are one and the same.
In that sense, Glacian is the true hero of this book, if there is such a person. The only one who truly knew what was going on, and enduring horrible torment for 9 years to fight it. Talking about the book itself for a moment, the revelation of all this is really terrible. The book does a relatively good job making us feel that somewhere in there, Yawgmoth is actually developing a cure. He even does so, but he only does it for his own selfish interests. Yawgmoth betrays our expectations, betrays his love for Beck, and betrays all the people of Halcyon. Especially the people of Halcyon. Interestingly enough, one of Yawgmoth's worst creations isn't a big part of the Thran, taking up a mere 9 pages in the main focus of the novel. Whilst Yawgmoth did first introduce himself as a cold-blooded killer in the Caves of the Damned, his reputation amongst the Untouchables got quite a bit better with time. Yawgmoth offered them what people desire most: life, hope, and freedom. As we've discussed, it was easy enough for Yawgmoth to incite fear amongst the citizens of Halcyon, so much so that they believed they needed a protector, someone to guard them from the terrible disease they believed was all among them. When being charged with fighting the disease, Yawgmoth put out a list of diagnostics for physis, which he claimed was highly contagious and a danger to everyone within Halcyon, including the elders which approved these diagnostics. Once again, fear was his greatest weapon. Citizens of Halcyon, an invader is among us, a deadly contagion caused by chronic exposure to Power Stone matrices. This disease can be spread person to person. Early detection remains our best defense. A case identified and treated early can prevent 100 more cases. Anyone noting any of the following symptoms in him or herself, family members, friends, or neighbors, is asked to report the findings to Health Counselor Yawgmoth. Fatigue, irritability, excitability, lassitude, forgetfulness, confusion, paranoia, itchiness, blotches, rash, pallor, swelling, numbness, lesions, stiff joints, dizziness, nausea, diarrhea, constipation, changes in eating and sleeping habits, headaches, neck aches, or backaches. The Council is declaring war on this disease and calls all health sites to aid in fighting that war. Health Counselor Yawgmoth will personally visit every reported person, providing a diagnosis, giving instructions to prevent the spread of disease, and where needed, administering treatments. It is the duty of all hell sites to cooperate and aid in any way possible. It is even noted by some of the elders in the book that Yawgmoth's symptoms were the symptoms of being human. But the healer's cult of personality was at this point big enough to sweep these accusations under the rug. Yawgmoth now had an entire city reporting people to him, once he would personally pay a visit, and, if he found they opposed his rule, he would send them off to the quarantine caves, letting out eternally grateful untouchables in return. He created his very own police state under the guise of public health and medicine. But the reason these quarantine caves are in this video is not just their obviously misleading political function, it is the conditions within them. While sending people and families to these caves wasn't technically murder, Yawgmoth was sending them to die. The serum sent to heal the people in the caves was diluted, and the conditions were absolutely vile. Liquid and solid waste were channeled down to fall between the scaffold and the wall. Once a week, a brigade of buckets doused the patients, and the overflow rinsed their bunks. Yawgmoth considered it an innovation. Gix considered it an atrocity. Lesions grew rampantly. Bed sores and splinters ravaged skin. Rancid meat gruel was ladled into cracked lips. In wet darkness, the sick lay. They died. Patients were encouraged to report deaths immediately. It meant more elbow room and more gruel. As I've said, whilst this technically wasn't murder, I'd argue it was even worse. Yawgmoth wasn't killing individuals, he was sending people en masse to slowly wither away and die, suffering for days and weeks for the sole crime of opposing him in his evil machinations. The Thran is a story of a few heroes. The story of Glacian, Gix, Rebecca, yet some of the most brave and sharp of the Thran most likely withered away and died within the confines of the caves. People whose names no one remembered, imprisoned for a crime no one committed. For the sole idea of standing between Yawgmoth and unlimited power. To put it simply, planeswalking is a power of a chosen few to walk in between the many planes of magic's multiverse. You can think of it as traveling in between planets, except instead of spaceships, you only need to be one of the few godlike mages chosen to possess this ability. Dyfed was one of them. Thran in origin, not much is known about the planeswalker outside of the fact that she specializes in healing magic. She was originally summoned by Glacian, who even in his completely devastated state managed to prove the existence of other planes within Power Stones, becoming in her eyes a genius she had to see with her own green eyes. Unfortunately, at that point Glacian could barely communicate through the various feeding tubes and machinery keeping him alive. But he could allow Yawgmoth to meet the powerful woman. Yawgmoth believed he was a god. It is shown multiple times, especially in his interactions with Dyfed, in which he takes him to other worlds across the multiverse. The physical laws governing every plane are different. What seems odd to a Dominarian would be natural to a Pyrulean, and vice versa. Looking up dizzily, Yawgmoth said,
There are Pyruleans? There are intelligent creatures from this world?
Yes, Dyfed said.
Yes, of course.
At last, Yawgmoth slumped onto his stomach, groaning.
It's all right,
Dyfed assured, setting a hand on his back.
This is a normal human response to planeswalking.
Clutching his stomach and curling into a ball, Yawgmoth said,
I am not a normal human.
Yawgmoth waited. He heard the demon summons, but he did not answer it. He was no demon. He was a god. Dyfed assisted Yawgmoth to his godhood. She was looking to create a sort of heaven for her people, for the Thran. Yawgmoth was seemingly attempted to do just that as well. And so Dyfed took him to the core of a plane, one with the corpse of the planeswalker who created it still inside. She warned Yawgmoth of the strength it takes to operate a world, but he was fully convinced of his power and felt the breath of the world as he ascended into godhood.
You're certain you want to perform the ritual?
Dyfed asked.
A mortal man might not survive the onrush of energies. Only a planeswalker.
Planeswalkers. Mortals.
Yawgmoth dismissed.
I have dissected the planeswalker who ruled here. I've peered into every tissue, parsed every organ. There was not a single mystic part. He was a biologic creature, as am I. It was this chamber that made him a god, and this chamber will make me its god also. I will survive.
How can you know that?
I felt it, as I tricked each scale free of the dead creature, as I conveyed each sinew outward. I felt the hunger of the chamber grow. Piece by piece, it lost its last master. Piece by piece, it has accepted me as its new master.
Unfortunately, I feel Dyfed is one of the more flawed characters in the Thran. Spice 8-Track talked about how the women in this book are kind of clueless in its amazing video on Yawgmoth, and I have to agree. Whilst Yawgmoth does proclaim himself to be the savior of the Thran, I think you should do a slightly better background check before allowing someone to simply become a god. In fact, I feel there were a bunch of alarm bells ringing already in the interaction we just read through. Talking about ripping the world's original owner and creator into pieces should never be done so coldly, even if it perhaps felt necessary to him. Dyfed was nothing but irresponsible with the world. Perhaps if she was just a little more careful, she would have saved Halcyon, saved Dominaria, and saved her own life. The world accepted Yawgmoth into its core, and he named it Phyrexia. Physis, the disease he was invited back to cure all those years ago, was progressive degeneration. Phyresis was its opposite, progressive generation. But generation of what? Yawgmoth immediately began recruiting people into his new world. Dying prisoners within the quarantine caves were suddenly offered miraculous treatment. Working in undiluted treatment, the glistening oil.
There are oil baths. Glistening oil. It soaks into the skin and reconstitutes it. It gets into the blood and helps to draw power stone radiation away from tissues. There are new procedures. Some patients are stronger than ever before. There is even a promising new therapy, implanting an uncharged power stone into the thigh muscle to draw excess energies into it. Those with the implants have been virtually healed. Their own immune systems are redoubled. They are growing new skin, new muscle, new tissues. Some are even getting taller.
Yawgmoth knew how to make it sound appealing. In reality, humans were getting turned into Phyrexians. New skin, new muscle, and new tissues turned them into caricatures of their original forms. The power stones in their thighs used for Yawgmoth to be able to ravage their minds whenever he so wished. They were stronger. They were taller. But all this only to serve better as slaves eternally bound to their new god, Yawgmoth. This I believe to be the worst possible fate. Whilst the treatment in the quarantine caves was utterly detestable, Phyrexians were not only living on a plane controlled by a man who had little to no regard for the pain of others, they had their own conscience and free will taken from the inside, designed directly after the 9 layers of Dante's Inferno. Living in Phyrexia is living in literal hell, where you are nothing but a bundle of flesh and metal, to be eternally tormented by a mad god. Dyfed not only made this possible, but has also encountered the most gruesome end depicted in all of the Thran. Once she saw through the ruse and found out what Yawgmoth had been doing on both Dominaria and Phyrexia, she came back to take his godhood away.
You are just another skeptic. I have healed the Physis.
You have devised a remedy that gives you complete control over your people. Heal the body but possess the soul.
I am not harming anyone.
You're harming everyone. The only ones you cannot harm are the ones I took away from you. The Elder Council.
You took them. Where are they?
They are safe.
Why have you come here?
I made you God, and I can take away your godhood.
Yawgmoth was silent for a time. He felt Phyrexia drawing back from him. He felt Dyfed's mind forcing its way between him and his world. From the 1,000 places it roamed in Phyrexia, Yawgmoth's mind withdrew. He shrank and coalesced from divinity to humanity. In moments, he stood beside Dyfed, in the midst of that dark space.
I suppose you can do whatever you want.
He smiled grimly.
You are, after all, a planeswalker. I am only a man, and your prisoner. I thought perhaps I was more. I thought perhaps I would save my people.
Yawgmoth was almost shockingly quick to come up with a solution to this problem.
I cannot escape you, but you should know other lives will be lost. Even now, the 8 ambassadors who came to Halcyon from the Allies, they live on the 4th sphere, but only by the exertions of my mind. If you take me out of Phyrexia, those 8 will die.
No, they won't.
Dyfed said bitterly.
My magic will heal anything short of vices. They won't die. They will return with us and tell of your atrocities.
She grasped his hand. Suddenly, they were on the 4th sphere. The place was infernal. A red glow filled the world. Giant furnaces reached from the rankled ground to the smoke-shrouded ceiling above. Huge flashes of fire illuminated the horrible place. Humans were utterly dwarfed by the massive mechanisms, but the Vat priests of Yawgmoth were no longer exactly human. Red-robed, masked in black, they were impossibly tall and impossibly lean. Eyes glowed in the dark. Razor-tipped fingers moved dexterously across instrumentation. Their own flesh had been transformed by their dark sciences. They swooped up around the new arrivals. Yawgmoth waved them back. When they recognized their master, the Vat priest backed away, bowing deeply and fearfully. Shocked by Yawgmoth's grim experiments, Dyfed lost her composure. He only needed a moment to drive a Power Stone dagger into her forehead, making her capable of thinking and planeswalking away. But this was not the end of her life. With a combination of her planeswalker powers and eugenesis machinery, Yawgmoth dissected Dyfed on the 4th sphere of Phyrexia while still alive, in barbaric attempts to find a planeswalking organ.
If there is a planeswalking organ, and there must be one, this woman has it. I soon will have it as well. They will find it in her, and they will put it inside of me.
According to Yawgmoth, she felt no pain, as
she is no longer able to feel torment.
Which I will go ahead and say is insanity. Planeswalkers are obviously not something we have studied in our world, but someone being dissected alive is definitely suffering in some way, godlike wizard or not. Staying in this state for an unknown amount of time, Dyfed lost the final bits of her consciousness only after Rebecca decided to mercy kill the woman. Dyfed was gone, but the portal to Phyrexia was not. I know I've said Dyfed was disturbed by Yawgmoth's experiments, but I have not mentioned who he experimented on. There is a reason for this. Shortly before the portal to Phyrexia was opened, a delegation has arrived. Dwarves, elves, minotaurs, cat people, the lizard people, the Ashino, and human tribes outside of the Thran realm have all come bearing tales of Yawgmoth, attempting to destroy their societies, hurting them ruthlessly and carelessly just as he did the Thran. 25 societies, all seemingly bearing witness to the heinous crimes Yawgmoth committed. Not much information is known on these events, in spite of each of them seemingly being fit for its own book. They are only summarized by the delegation asking for Yawgmoth to be immediately sent back to exile. The dwarves of Oran Deeps have had the black cough set upon them by Yawgmoth, starting a rebellion and nearly ending 1,000 years of dwarven rule. The elves have been consumed by the creeping mold of Yawgmoth, which he had turned into a plague. He kidnapped the priestess Alessandra Ladimrith and her healers, holding her for ransom. Once the ransom was paid, he only delivered sweetened water and 12 dead healers. The Toleron Minotaurs have had the White Death released among them by Yawgmoth, purely because he wanted to study its effects. For the purposes of science, he captured and vivisected the Bay of the Shivan Viashino, studying the brains of the lizard people. In what I am assuming he found absolutely hilarious, he also spread rabies amongst the cat people, making them kill each other in a frenzy. And he even poisoned the human tribes of Gulatomatia. I say even, because Yawgmoth is depicted as a racist throughout the Thran. And nowhere is that more clear than here. The Viashino, the cat people, the Minotaurs, to him they are merely fodder for his mad experiments. Of course, Yawgmoth had no problem hurting humans just as much, but with the Thran, he truly saw himself a savior. Of course, it's hard to say if Yawgmoth believed anything he'd said, but he claimed he would turn the Thran into gods, which would overcome mortality. And, as far as his mind is concerned, he kept his promise. Figures swarmed the white cylinders: cat people, lizard men, dwarves, elves, roaches, silverfish, earwigs, flies. He could fumigate the city. Yawgmoth could slay them all with a thought, and that fact comforted him. But his own folk would die. Phyrexian and Hellside guards fought the swarming Thran in alleys and doorways. Upon hearing the emissary's confessions, Yawgmoth asked for a vote to be held. A simple vote on whether he should be extradited back to exile or not. The vote was even, not a flawless victory. Yawgmoth's greatest weapon, fear, was now held by his opponents. The final, deciding vote had fallen on Rebecca. Rebecca stared up at Yawgmoth, a strange look in her eyes. She seemed to be seeing him for the first time, though whether that look brought joy or terror, he could not have told. "I vote," she began, her voice a mere whisper. Clearing her throat, she said, "I vote nay."
15 opposed, 13 in favor. Extradition is denied.
Rebecca's trust was beginning to fade, but not fast enough. All of the emissaries who have come to deliver tales of Yawgmoth's horrors were taken straight to Phyrexia, to experience them firsthand, to become the horrors which would go on to disturb Dyfed in her final moments of thought. Unlike the gradual transformations occurring with the battered humans, these poor creatures had been cut up and sewn back together brutally and mercilessly. Eyes had been sewn into the belly of the dwarf. Fingers had been grafted to the forehead of the elf. A duck's wing replaced one of the Minotaur's arms. A mechanical head had replaced the Catwoman's skull. The only reason each one of the emissaries doesn't get their own category in this video is because of how little attention is given to them in the book. They rival the worst of Yawgmoth's horrors, but they simply serve as little excerpts in the book itself. This, of course, did not appease the kingdoms and societies whose emissaries never came back, though they would never go on to witness their true fate. They would, however, stand up, starting the battle which the entire book has been leading up to. The Battle of Mageddon Defile. Yawgmoth was prepared for war. He couldn't have expected nothing else after kidnapping a delegation of 25 different societies. He had his Phyrexians, now developed and ready to strike with inhuman resilience, aggression, and joy. He had his rule above Halcyon firmly established, eliminating his opponents, leaving them rotting in the caves below. This now included Glacian, whom he had, against Rebecca's wishes, forced into the quarantine caves. He had Gix, now transformed into a fearsome Phyrexian commander, obeying nothing but his newfound god, Yawgmoth.
Isn't that what we are?
The commander mused. It was merely an observation, not a condemnation. Yawgmoth had been right about everything. On a day long ago, he had forced Gix to accept the cure for the physis, the power that lay in that cure. Perhaps Gix had died that day, the old Gix, but a new man was born, a new monster. Commander Gix held his head high, a head now a third larger than it had been. The change had begun shortly after his Phyrexian heartstone had been implanted. Even as his skin grew healthy again, his tangled locks of hair had fallen out. Beneath it, skin and skull both had grown outward. The change at first had frightened him, but a voice within assured there was nothing to fear. Skin and skull grew to allow his brain to grow as well. A newfound clarity of thought seemed to confirm this belief. Suddenly, the whole insane world had come clear to him. Even as the skull had settled into its current, striated form, his mind had settled his devotion to Yawgmoth, his glimpse of the Master's vision, his delight in his work. Yawgmoth even had the access to all of Glacian's memories and present thoughts. He implanted a power stone inside of him to ravage and take his thoughts the way he could with Phyrexians. All of the war machines and designs helping Yawgmoth take victory over every other Dominarian nation were from Glacian. And so was the Null Sphere. Whilst they mentioned it briefly whilst talking about Yawgmoth's cold-blooded murders, the sphere holds much more importance than that. Yawgmoth knew about the Null Sphere from Glacian, a device originally meant to oversee every artifact in the Thran Empire. But, as it goes, Yawgmoth found a much more sinister use for it. The Null Sphere could fly, given enough energy. It could also control every single artifact in the Empire, rather than just overseeing them. This included those of his enemies, as they too used Glacian's designs. The Thran artifact armies were falling back. Mantises whirled about and loped toward the entrenchments. Shredders ceased chewing through Phyrexians and rolled toward the Thran.
This is no retreat.
Dwarven Commander Curtis Worthy gabbled. With his remaining hand, he grabbed his battle axe.
This is betrayal.
A Phyrexian loped wolf-like toward Curtis Worthy. It was a horrible thing, with pink skin bursting atop impossibly large shoulders. The same unholy forces that had stretched the clavicles of that beast had extended its jawbones into a pair of wicked tusks. Teeth crowded the mouth above, and fire-filled compound eyes. The Phyrexian vaulted forward, shrieking. Curtis Worthy hurled his axe into the thing's path. His aim was true. The blade struck the Phyrexian just as it had the Mantis warrior, in the head. It chopped through the toothy face and sinus cavities and brow ridge. It cut through the cerebral sac and into the brain. 2 swings and 2 kills, both with his left hand. Except that this wasn't a kill. What animated the Metal Warrior could not stop this Phyrexian. The brain that oozed from that cleft was no vital organ. Only the lizard mind was needed to fight like this. With filed tusks and bloody teeth, the Phyrexian bit through Curtis Worthy's good arm. Skin and muscle split, bone crunched, teeth met teeth. There was blood. Lots of blood. Curtis Worthy fell on his back, staring up at the thing. It had once been a man, but now what was it? Hackled and horrid, the monster hunched against the blazing sky. Dwarven Commander Curtis Worthy turned his head away. If this was the future of Dominaria, he did not wish to see it. His final vision was stranger still. As his lifeblood gushed out of him, he saw a vast, grey orb. A moon hanging so low in the sky, there was no sky. He could not imagine what this thing could be. It gleamed brilliantly. It cast a blinding light on Halcyon, where through the defile in deep darkness. Into that valley of death, the army of the Thran Alliance fled. What can it be? What can it mean? He saw something small drop from the belly of that great sphere. It fell into the center of the defile, into the midst of the fleeing army. The blackness suddenly vanished in an otherworldly radiance. Dwarven Commander Curtis Worthy smiled one last time, and was gone. More notably still, Yawgmoth could use the null sphere to drain away leftover energy from what he called stone chargers. They were uncharged power stones which functioned similarly to the worst bombs of our time. They charged into them whatever was around, leaving behind nothing but a deathly white cloud. No witnesses, no victims. Yawgmoth seemed undefeatable, standing against the combined force of 6 races, 25 nations, unflinching, strategically unleashing humans, machines and Phyrexians onto the oncoming attackers. He seemed to have it all, every horrific tool in his arsenal ready to execute his enemies. But there was something, someone he didn't have. Someone he would never have again. Rebecca. After 9 years, Rebecca had finally come to trust Glacian, understanding Yawgmoth's deception, and now destruction. Our people will survive. Yawgmoth will win this war. Even if he does not, there is Phyrexia.
No. Whoever goes there is changed, is destroyed. You can save the rest. You can take them away in the Thran temple.
Take them away?
A control stone. Create a control stone, just like the ones that move the sedan chairs. Create a control stone and mount it on the central altar of the temple, and you can fly it away from Halcyon, away from the war, from destruction.
Rebecca could only stare, mouth dropping open in amazement.
You can save our people, Rebecca. They can ascend, just as you have always hoped. You could take them to heaven, take them away from this hell.
A new light had entered Rebecca's eyes, a blue and fragile light in the warm blanket of lamp glow.
You know it can be done. You know it must be done.
I know it can be done, Rebecca echoed distantly.
Don't tell Yawgmoth.
No.
Don't let him plant one of his stones in you.
No.
Promise me you'll do it. Promise you'll make it the control stone. Promise me you'll take our people away from here.
No. Eyes distant in the black space, she stood, took a deep breath, and said, I have to go. There is a battle being fought.
Yes. Go, Rebecca. Leave me, but save them. Save them.
Rebecca took some goblins with her and went looking for a power stone, an icosahedron, a 20-sided control stone which could be used for the temple. She managed to successfully find and mount it in the temple, but unfortunately the refugees were still left within the cold confines of the caves. She went in to let them out, but let them go first, going to visit her dying husband one last time. He was gone. It was as simple as that. Coma. He had awakened from comas before, but not this time. Not with his skin in rags, his temples as sunken as caves, his eyes dilated and unresponsive beneath papery lids. Only the puffing machines, the scuttling goblins, the living casket kept him alive anymore. In all other ways, he was gone. Perhaps if she had come sooner, if she had come here first and gone to the refugees after, perhaps she could have spoken to him one last time. That was the wrong way to think. Nothing happened by chance. It wasn't even a draughts match anymore. One player controlled both halves of the board. Yawgmoth. That's why he didn't make it down here in time, Rebecca said wearily. He didn't want me to. You are right all along. You are right about him, about everything. He deceived everyone but you. Deceived and seduced us all.
except you.
A chill clotted Rebecca's spine. She drew back the edge of Glacian's infirmary garment. Folds slid away from a gaunt hip bone, translucent skin showing the shrunken muscle beneath. Glacian's emaciation was awful. Rebecca cringed, tears coming to her eyes. Even so, she pulled back the gown.
Gods, no.
The cut Yawgmoth had made in her husband's side had never healed. Black stitches straddled the gash. The flesh was dark and desiccated. Beneath lurked a malignant wound. It looked to be a tumor, the size of 2 fists clutched together.
He didn't. He couldn't have,
she muttered, touching the spot. It was hard as rock.
Oh gods, no. He did.
He did what?
Before Rebecca could go and fly the refugees out of the city, Yawgmoth found her. The great lover he was, he drugged her up and kidnapped her, taking her straight into the heart of Phyrexia. There, he made himself her god, showing her all of Phyrexia, hoping to impress her. He showed her his stone chargers, his machines, Dyfed. Upon seeing her, Rebecca was, even in her still drugged-up state, horrified.
You're a barbarian. You're a cannibal.
Yawgmoth stared down at her, honest confusion in his eyes.
This is not barbarism. This is the truth. This is science.
You kill your enemy and eat her heart and her brain, hoping to gain her courage and wisdom. But you'll never have courage, only ruthlessness, and you'll never have wisdom, only arrogance.
After this, Yawgmoth took her back to the heart of Phyrexia, possessing her entire being. She managed to hide a singular thought before he took over everything. The fact that she did truly love him. She replaced that love with hatred. With hatred for everything he now stood for. Yawgmoth was disappointed, but he had more important matters to attend to. Leaving her powerless in the heart of Phyrexia, going off to Dominaria to continue his war. Yet Rebecca awoke. Still covered in Yawgmoth's scent, she managed to get Phyrexia to trust her. She was terrified, which helped convince it. No one knew fear like Yawgmoth's dearest servants. She used the plane's trust to mercy kill Dyfed and to rescue Glacian. It is only now revealed that one of the reasons why Dyfed originally came to Dominaria was that Glacian was a nascent planeswalker, one whose spark was yet to awaken. Yawgmoth clearly planned to do with Glacian just as he did with Dyfed, looking for the planeswalking organ. Getting the plane to kill the 4 Vat priests and transfer her back to Glacian, Rebecca immediately escaped back to the Caves of the Damned. But whilst Rebecca was entering a new fight underneath Halcyon, Yawgmoth was fighting his continuous war up in the city. And it wasn't going well. Upon seeing the devastating effects of his stone chargers, the artificers operating the Null Sphere decided to go up, sacrificing their own lives to save what was left of Dominaria. In their final act, they defeated fear, Yawgmoth's greatest weapon. This, of course, caused the killing white cloud created by the stone chargers to spread uncontrollably, rising all the way up to Halcyon, slaying everything in its path. Using his twisted genius, Yawgmoth still somehow managed to take advantage of the situation. A groan of terror rose from the moiling multitude. Fingernails clawed at any crack that might be a doorway. The voice of Yawgmoth came again, the throng quieted beneath its mesmeric balm.
It should be a time for utter despair. The dream is over. All is lost, but not all. I have prepared a perfect place for you. A world beyond illness and death, beyond wars and plagues and famines. Oh, my people, how I have longed to bring you to paradise.
When the death was descending upon them, no one saw another option. Hellsites, Thran, cat people, minotaurs, humans, elves, Viashino, all of them rushed into Yawgmoth's world, forgetting all their previous alliances, slaughtering each other on a way to salvation rather than on a way to peace. Yawgmoth promised heaven, and in his mind, it truly was. Yawgmoth sighed with pleasure. Minotaur muscle, dwarven pragmatism, elven longevity, feline grace, reptilian armor. The Phyrexians would benefit greatly from their fallen foes. Even now, the priests sliced and categorized and pickled their flesh. Hamstrings and femurs, brains and hearts, livers and spleens emptied into the grinders. All was right with the world. Yawgmoth was in his heaven. But even for Yawgmoth, his heaven was flawed. It missed an essential piece. Through all this, Rebecca was talking to Glacian in the very last moments of his life. After his passing, she noticed a faint glow within her husband's body. As an act of poetic justice, Yawgmoth decided to hide the two halves of a power stone with which the portal to Phyrexia was originally opened, inside of the key which opened Halcyon's doors to him all those years ago. He left them inside of Glacian. Flinging away the scalpel, Rebecca savagely snatched up the two crystals. Congealed blood draped her wrists. She didn't care. The stones were warm. A gentle light danced within them, the same gentle light in each. They were not two stones, but two halves of a whole. Wiping the jagged edges against her husband's robes, she lifted them, lined them up, and slowly brought them together. As the halves neared each other, the light in them intensified. What had seemed only a failing spark became a flicking flame and then whirling fire. The crystals glowed. They beamed. Jags of energy arced between them. With each jolt, the heat increased. Blood dried, burst into quick flames, and blazed away. The heat was excruciating. Rebecca thrust the halves together. But what Yawgmoth had not realized was that Glacian's soul would stay. Rebecca could hear him again, his soul preserved in the Power Stone thanks to Glacian's nascent planeswalker spark. And he had an idea.
He will try to return. He wants to rule Dominaria. He wants to rule the whole multiverse, but Dominaria first. It is his holy land. Once the null moon has drawn off the mana clouds, he will try to return.
Yes, of course he will.
But we can stop him, you and I.
How?
The stone he implanted in me, this heart stone, it was Yawgmoth's idea of poetic justice. This was the crystal Dyfed used to open the portal to Phyrexia. Recharged and rejoined, the crystal can seal that portal forever.
Oh, Glacian.
I will be the gatekeeper. You need merely set the crystal on the mirror podium, and the portal will close. I will remain, keeping Yawgmoth and his monstrous nation locked away. He is no planeswalker. He will not escape from his Phyrexia. His world will become his prison.
Oh, Glacian. I can't sentence you to that. To an eternity alive and alone in stone.
It will be a long eternity, yes, my dear, but a glad one, knowing Yawgmoth's torment.
Again came that raking laugh.
And knowing the world, the multiverse, is safe from him. I was right about him. I was right all along.
Yes, and we were wrong about you,
Rebecca said.
You're always a curmudgeon, but a good man. A very good man. And I loved you.
Then you weren't wrong about me.
His presence, for one brief moment, seemed to wrap around her. There was a fleeting, ephemeral kiss.
And I loved you. Now you must descend. We must banish Yawgmoth once and for all.
Yes.
The caves were now empty, save for the artifact warriors guarding the entrance. Rebecca snuck up towards the portal. At this point, Yawgmoth found out she had in fact escaped his Phyrexian prison and rushed to the entrance to get her back, knowing what she was going to do.
You need never be alone again. Never be in darkness.
Suddenly silhouetted against the bright sky stood Yawgmoth. He was tall and beautiful in his world. His eyes were as bright as stars. His cloak swirled about him.
Come join us. Come. Receive me. Now, Rebecca, seal it before he steps through to drag you in.
He won't step through,
She said confidently, loud enough for Yawgmoth to hear.
He won't risk being trapped on this side, where he is only a mortal man. He wants me to live with him. He doesn't want to die with me. Goodbye, Sky. Goodbye, husband. Goodbye, Yawgmoth.
Rebecca speaks her final words before closing off the portal to Phyrexia, confessing her love to Yawgmoth, leaving herself in total darkness. Then, she did what her goal was from the very beginning. Into the white heaven above, she ascended. Yawgmoth succeeded. Sure, he was locked out of Dominaria, but he was a god, the ineffable, with a whole world at his disposal. It was only a question of time before he could enter Dominaria again. What I find fascinating about Yawgmoth's story, and old Phyrexia as a whole, is that there are eldritch threats in Magic the Gathering. There are the Elder Dragons, characteristically power-hungry, egotistical beings who get their identity from being some of the strongest and oldest beings in the multiverse. There are the Eldrazi, Magic's answer to eldritch horror. They are natural forces who have never been properly explained outside of being destructive enigmas. Demons, vampires, fickle gods, and tons of other magical creatures don't surprise us with being evil. They are myths created and assigned that role by us. Yawgmoth stands out among them, as he is, or at least has been during his time on Dominaria, human. Yawgmoth didn't have any supernatural powers, outside of a talent for healing and spreading disease alike. He didn't think himself better because of some kind of a magical power he possessed, because of some kind of supernatural origin. He simply found himself superior to everyone because that was how his mind worked. And that gave him the idea that he had a right to reshape the world in his own twisted image. And the world enabled it. He entered a society with its own plagues. He simply did what he did best, let those plagues grow. He observed the vices until he could use it to his own advantage. He saw a prison colony, an ignored, rotting wound of society, and prodded at it until it gave him valuable allies, and free test subjects clamoring over each other for who could reach Phyrexia first. He saw Rebecca, her ideas of ascension, and warped them in his own image, until he had an entire world ascending to hell with him. Evil is human. Yawgmoth was a man who was faced with a decision of whether he wanted to become a god of evil, and he not only accepted it, he actively pursued it for, as far as we know, his entire life. Yawgmoth's heaven was hell. And much like the most hellish ideas and actions in our world, it was man-made. Whilst his form and mind have changed on Phyrexia, all of the evils of its 9,000-year reign have been organized and orchestrated by Yawgmoth, an ordinary man from Dominaria.